Welcome to the Jeffers Brief, only on Contra Radio Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Jeffers Brief. I'm John Jeffers on the Contra Radio Network, also on KYAH 540 AM out of Delta, Utah, Utah's Talk Authority. Welcome to another weekly episode of vital information needed for patriots and preppers. If you're not sure what a prepper is, look it up online. If you are one, know this. You preppers and patriots are a subculture. And many times you guys, the subcultures overlap. So, you got that. But anyways, I want to say welcome. I'm glad you guys are here. What do we got? Yes, of course. Yes, thank you. Hey, if you want to watch the video, I'm making a video of this now. So we do a simulcast video as well as the podcast. We got many things to talk about. Many, many things. One of the things we need to understand. Okay, yes, the IG's report came out. Yes, the DOJ refused to prosecute. They refused to prosecute at this time. Not ever at this time. See, Comey's kind of low-hanging fruit. And my guess is they'd rather give him a pass on this one and then hammer him for something else a little bit later, something bigger. Now, granted, we're going to talk about Comey's hubris. If you don't know what it means, that's okay. I'm here to hold your hand and walk you through this vast territory. Because I like you. You're my listeners. You guys are smart people. One of the things that we need to talk about is, of course, the upcoming IG report on Comey. Now, a former Assistant U.S. Attorney, Victoria Tensing, and former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Joe DeGenova, they were talking to Lou Dobbs. I like Lou Dobbs. I listen to him all the time. I like watching him on Fox Business News. And he had them on. This is what they had to say. Because they discussed the alleged, remember it's only alleged, Comey leaks to the media and why the Justice Department decided not to charge him. So without further delay, shall we listen? I think we should. Because it's a good thing.
Welcome back. The Department of Justice Inspector General reportedly set to release a report on James Comey's corrupt behavior during his time as FBI director. The Washington Examiner's Byron York telling us the report could be released tomorrow. The Inspector General is looking into classified memoranda detailing private conversations Comey had with President Trump. Comey leaked those memos to a friend in the media. Joining us tonight, Victoria Tensing, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Justice Department, Joe DeGenova, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, founding partners of the DeGenova and Tensing law firm. Great to have you both with us. Your reaction to these reports, and let me be specific, Byron York of the Washington Examiner reporting that this could come within 24 hours. Your thoughts, Victoria?
Well, first of all, Lou, I want to say congratulations on being #1 for 40 months.
Well,
I want to know when you get tired of winning. Would you please tell us?
Yes, but be prepared to wait.
Okay. Now, regarding the Comey report, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me that there was a decision not to prosecute Comey, and now the IG report is coming out. So I don't think it's any big deal as far as it's going to come out in 24 hours. It may criticize him, but the decision has already been made not to prosecute him. What I hope is that he is included, Comey, in the FISA abuse part, because he signed the first FISA application with verified on the top of it, and it was not verified, and that is a gross error. It's a taking away the due process of Carter Page.
Two questions, Joe, then, that spring from what Victoria has said.
It's not a gross error. It's called perjury. Perjury. Say it. So let's all say it together. It's called perjury. That's when you go into court, you raise your hand, swear to tell the truth, and then you sit there and you lie. That is called, altogether, perjury. Shall we continue? Yes, we shall.
One is why then would the Inspector General be carrying a separate report on the fired former FBI director with this, at least the suggestion that there would be no prosecution. Could this possibly be a reversal of that, what appeared to be an earlier decision?
No, I think what happened was they wanted to make the prosecution decision first. I think they had Horowitz's report, and he didn't want to publish that if they were going to prosecute. And they might have even held it up if they were going to charge him. So once they decided not to charge, he's now going to release his report. I can understand the reasons because of the classification problems and all that, but I agree with Victoria. The real mother lode here is not this report, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of awful behavior by him and his lawyer and all this other stuff. To me, what matters is the FISA application process, and I'm sure that's what most people want to know about, because remember, that's what is at the genesis of all the illegal activity, is what they did to try and get the president through Carter Page. And so, well,
let's talk about that.
Sure.
4 FISA warrants applied for.
Yep.
The Inspector General has indicated that all 4 were illegal on their face, Victoria.
Yes.
How could he not hold responsible every signatory on every one of those warrant applications?
Yep.
It defies my
Including
imagination why people are not being indicted for this kind of false statement. These are not, just not lying to an IG, which is kind of maybe child's play. Michael Flynn made a false statement, yeah, really, about his conversation with the Russian ambassador, that our government already had the complete conversation. But this was going after taking the U.S. government's intelligence weapon and directing it at a political campaign of the opposing party. How could this not be some kind of criminal offense?
It is absolutely inconceivable, Lou, that when you have 4 warrants of this magnitude involving a political campaign, and they were all falsely obtained, it is inconceivable to me that you cannot prosecute the people responsible for that. And if that is the decision that is made, not to prosecute, there better be a damn good explanation.
Yeah, I would just underline and put exclamation marks after every word you've said there. It is the American people will I can't imagine them tolerating that result were that the case, as you point out. Dana Bente, the only person who is still in a job at the Justice Department, the FBI, who was a signator on all of this, still has a job, still seems to be part of the apparatus.
Bruce Orr is still there.
Well, that's right. You're exactly right. How can this be?
I don't know how it can be, because talk about Rod Rosenstein for all his pomposity. Mm-hmm. He said, well, I really didn't read the application. Now, come on. I've been at that department. I've seen documents this thick. If I'm getting a document to spy against our president, which is what it was at the time Rod Rosenstein signed it,
right,
I'm reading every word at least once. And he said, oh, I was briefed on it. Talk about arrogance.
Arrogance, and by the way, there was no shyness about Andrew McCabe either in that respect. And the indication is he is going to be charged. That does not seem consonant with simply a waiver for everyone else who had signed those documents, Joe.
Yeah. Well, you see, here's the problem. The issue is, are we going to have one standard of justice, or are we going to have 2? This is a pretty simple concept. Thus far, the 2 standards of justice seems to be winning clearly in America. So what the decisions that are going to be made over the next several months about who gets prosecuted and doesn't are going to be a bellwether of how we're doing on that side of things. Because, Lou, I have to tell you, the FISA warrant process was created because the subject matter was so important. They didn't like what Richard Nixon did, so they created this whole legal process with these courts. It has been the bellwether of the way we conduct surveillance of American citizens and others in spying matters. And if you can get away with what Comey and McCabe and all these people did, and if you can be as lax as Rosenstein apparently was in not reading the actual affidavit, then the process should be put to a halt.
Yeah.
And it should stop. They shouldn't use it anymore. And they ought to go back to having the President of the United States make all the decisions about who gets spied on.
And here's what the FISA court owes us.
Very quickly,
The FISA
please, Victoria.
It owes us an explanation of what it did about all of this.
Yeah,
so that we can
what
have
if
faith in
anything,
it.
did the FISA court do when it found all this out?
And what did the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court
Oh,
do
that was
about
my next line.
Johnny R.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Victoria. We will continue the conversation
minds.
at the
Great
center.
minds.
Well, thank you for putting me in your club.
All right, there you have it. Joe DeGeneva's right. I've been screaming about a two-tier justice system. Joe is absolutely correct in his assessment, and Victoria is absolutely correct too. What in the hell has the FISA court done when they found out perjury's been committed? Nobody knows. Why? Why? Are they protecting someone? Are they not? Have they done something? Have they not done anything? What? That's a real good question. Okay. Now, let's go back to Comey. What a goof. You know how I feel about him. Now, in case you're watching the video, you saw me suck down. I've been drinking cold coffee. I love cold coffee. Like iced coffee, even better. However, now I'm starting to feel the, it's really starting to roll. Now, I said we were going to talk about hubris. Hubris means, it's from the ancient Greek, it describes a personality quality of extreme or foolish pride or dangerous overconfidence, often in combination with or synonymous with arrogance. If that doesn't describe Comey, I don't know what does. But I find that to be pretty right on the money. Now, excuse me. Now, Comey has tweeted out today on August 29th, Thursday, you don't believe that hubris defines Comey's personality aside with narcissism? Here, he tweets out, the DOJ IG, the Inspector General, found no evidence that Comey or his attorneys released any of the classified information contained in any of the memos to members of the media. That's a quote from Comey. He says, I don't need a public apology from those who defamed me, but a quick message with a sorry we lied about you would be nice. And then he tweets, and to all those who spent 2 years talking about me going to jail or being a liar and a leaker, ask yourselves, why you still trust people who gave you bad info for so long, including the president? That's what this guy tweeted out, okay? Now, there appears to be a concerted media and allies, think lawfare, strategy to focus attention to the DOJ decision not to prosecute James Comey. Well, as you heard from Victoria Tennessee and Joe DeGeneva. Why? Now, this generates outrage, which has a tendency to create useful backlash. Mr. Comey also appears to be fueling this. Remember, it has been a part of the small group defense is to use outrage as part of their strategy. Focus on the actual conduct. That's where corrupt intent is evident. Now, the issues surround President Obama and high-ranking Obama intelligence officials, notably John Brennan, James Comey, James Clapper, and Sally Yates, intentionally lying and are misrepresenting issues to President-elect Donald Trump and the transition team in and around the transition period and shortly after the January 20th, 2017 inauguration. Some of the misinformation stems from intelligence officials telling direct lies. For example, telling President-elect and President Trump he was not under investigation. Other aspects were lies of omission surrounding the Steele dossier during the January 6, 2017 intelligence briefing session with President-elect Trump in Trump Tower. In essence, there were many misleading and false statements with varying scales of severity during the period from November 9, 2016 through mid-May 2017, when President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. Now, the FBI agent in charge, this is from the Last Refuge, this is Sundance, putting this out on Twitter. FBI agent in charge of the Mueller investigation, David Archie, appears to describe Mr. Comey's memos in an entirely different context than the Inspector General. Now, the FBI, the DOJ, ODNI, and CIA and intelligence officials were intentionally not being direct and honest with President Trump and key members of his new administration. Obviously, their lack of honesty was a serious issue and in some cases had serious ramifications. The express finding by Robert Mueller's 2-year probe of the no Trump-Russia collusion, no Trump-Russia conspiracy, and no Trump-Russia obstruction has led to some hindsight reviews where anger surfaces about the now visible deception. However, there is a trap laid here, and Democrats are hoping outraged voices will walk straight into it. Now, some are getting very close. At 12:15 on January 20th, 2017, Obama's outgoing National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, that's right, Susan, we haven't forgotten about you, sweetheart. We haven't forgotten about you. She wrote a memo to herself, and many people have called this her CYA. If you're not sure what CYA is, let me help you with that. It's cover your ass. Memo from the position that Susan Rice was protecting herself from consequences if the scheme against President Trump was discovered. Now, here's the email she wrote. This is what it says. On January 5, following a briefing by the IC leadership on Russian hacking during the 2016 presidential election, President Obama had a brief follow-up conversation with FBI Director Jim Comey and Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates in the Oval Office. Vice President Biden and I were also present. Now, President Obama began the conversation by stressing his continued commitment to ensuring that every aspect of this issue is handled by the intelligence and law enforcement communities by the book. The President stressed that he is not asking about, initiating, or instructing anything from a law enforcement perspective. He reiterated that our law enforcement team needs to proceed as it normally would by the book, Mr. Powers. From a national security perspective, however, President Obama said he wants to be sure that as we engage with the incoming team, we are mindful to ascertain if there's any reason that we cannot share information fully as it relates to Russia. Now, there's a redacted, classified section of unknown length at this point. Then there's a new paragraph. The President asked Comey to inform him if anything changes in the next few weeks that should affect how we share classified information with the incoming team. Comey said he would. Now, as stated, many have looked at this as a CYA memo, but that's not what this is. This is a justification memo written by an outgoing NSA advisor, Susan Rice, to document why there have been multiple false and misleading statements given to the incoming president and all of his officials. This is not a CYA memo. This is a justification memo for use after the Trump-Russia collusion conspiracy narrative collapsed if the impeachment effort failed. Now, by the book aspect refers to President Obama and Susan Rice being told by CIA Director Brennan and FBI Director Comey Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates that President Trump was the subject of an active counterintelligence investigation to determine if he was under the influence of the Russian government. Even the timing of the memo, written 15 minutes prior to the end of the Obama administration, is ex post facto useful as evidence of the author's intent. Now, put aside the nonsense aspect to the origination of the investigation for a moment. That part doesn't apply here. Accept their position as if it is substantive. We were talking about Brennan, Comey, Clapper, Yates, and they're telling Obama and Rice that President Trump is under a counterintelligence investigation where the suspicion is that Donald Trump is an agent of a foreign power. Ooh. Under the auspices, fraudulent though it may be, the incoming president is a counterintelligence investigation target, a potentially compromised Russian asset. Under the auspices of the officials would be permitted to lie and mislead their target, so long as they did so by the book, Mr. Powers. That's their justification for a lengthy series of lies and false statements. That's why FBI Director Comey can lie to the president and tell him he's not the target of the ongoing Russia investigation. That's the justification for keeping the accusations inside the Steele dossier. Remember, the dossier is evidence from the president-elect. That's the justification for all the officials to lie to President Trump and even mislead the media if needed. The Susan Rice email is one big justification letter, setting the stage for all the participants to have a plausible reason for lies to anyone and everyone. Now, calling out Brennan for telling Harry Reid about the Steele dossier during his Gain of 8 briefing, but not telling the Go 8 member, Devin Nunes, about it. Remember, Brennan escapes by saying Nunes was on the Trump transition team. In a briefing, a conflicted politician on the dossier would have compromised the FBI investigation. You see how this works? See how it all plays out? Now, call me for lying to the president-elect during the January 6th Trump Tower meeting. Comey escapes by saying Trump was a target of the FBI investigation for potential compromise as a Russian asset. Informing the target of the evidence against him would have compromised the investigation. Do you see how that works, how that plays out? So every lie, every omission, every false and or misleading statement must be filtered through the by-the-book prism of Trump being considered a Russian asset. This is the justification trap Democrats are waiting to exploit for maximum damage and diminishment of a counterattack. The by-the-book justification, where every action could have been taken because Trump might have been an actual Russian operative, is the weapon under the camouflage tarp as the radical left lures in their political opposition. They shrug their shoulders and say in a condescending voice, well, we didn't know. We had to be prudent, etc., etc., etc. You know, all the BS. Getting outraged about the Obama administration's lies, misstatements, fabrications can backfire if you don't first think about it from their constructed frame of reference. The by-the-book framework is based on a false premise, but the action, just about any action, taken to mislead, even undermine the incoming administration, is excusable under this carefully crafted justification memo. That's exactly why Susan Rice wrote it, and each of the participating members knows they can use it when needed. The way to get around the legal and political defense inside this justification memo is to ignore the activity of those protected by it and go directly to the origin of how they created that false premise in the first place. All right, you follow it now? Does it make sense to you? Well, it should. All right. More stuff. More. What have we got? Oh, hey, the great one, Mark Levin, talks about why there's great disrespect for the media today. Well, yes, it is true. They did it to themselves. No argument. They did it to themselves. But let's listen to the great one.
There's a great disrespect for the media today. They have a credibility problem thanks to them. They've turned off half of America. They treat half of America with utter contempt. They bring on their news shows. You know, the days of Huntley Brinkley and Howard K. Smith are long over. Can you imagine? What have we heard over the last 2 years? They bring in a porn actress hundreds of times, her now soon-to-be felonious lawyer hundreds of times. They bring on a neo-Nazi, Jake Tapper did, to try and attack the president. They had to fire an anti-Semitic professor over there at CNN, doing better than the New York Times, who still has their anti-Semitic senior editor. Race-baiting professors endlessly, ex-Obama officials with their vicious allegations against the president, never Trumpers who nobody's ever heard of before with their vicious allegations against the president. And what do we hear day in and day out from our unpatriotic media? That the president's Hitler. Do they know who Hitler is? That the president's Stalin. That he's Mussolini, that he's a white supremacist, that he's a racist, a bigot, an anti-Semite, a dictator. I just wrote these down when I hear them. A neo-Nazi, he's depraved, he's treasonous, he's demented, mentally ill, serial liar, compromised. I mean, to me that all sounds like Joe Scarborough, but what do I know? Now, what else do they push? Russia collusion, lie, the dossier, lie, impeachment, bizarre, obstruction, lie. So of course the public's turning on the press. And the president has every right to defend himself.
There you have it. That's what he says. Now, something he talked about. How the Democratic and media complex, they still bitterly cling to the Charlottesville Lie. If you missed it a couple weeks ago, look for it on the podcast at contraradionetwork.podbean.com. There's a summary of all the shows. Look for the Jeffers Brief, and you'll see it. It's called the Charlottesville Lie. If you don't know what it is, you need to listen to that first, so you'll understand what I'm talking about now. Now, Steve Cortez over at Human Events has written about this. And you need to understand this. I want you to understand what we're talking about here. Now, back in 2008, then Senator Barack Obama created a firestorm when he told an upscale fundraising audience in Tony, San Francisco, that you go into these small towns in Pennsylvania, and like a lot of small towns in the Midwest, the jobs have been gone now for 25 years. And it's not surprising then they get bitter and they cling to their guns or religion. Of course, many of us view clinging to the Second Amendment and to religious faith as a fundamental cornerstone of a worthwhile life as conscientious and free citizens of America. But regardless, Obama clearly intended the description as a condescending pejorative. Well, the bitter clingers now include luminaries of the left, media mavens, and Democratic politicians desperately clutching on to their debunked myth about Charlottesville and President Trump, the fine people hoax. For 2 years, since the tragic, violent events of August 2017 in Charlottesville, media figures have shamefully pushed the lie that President Trump praised the white supremacists who gathered there as very fine people. Now, before I go on, you need to understand this. This is a prime example of journalistic malfeasance. That is, they reported it, and when they went back and looked at it, they realized they were wrong, but yet they still refused to correct the record, and they still keep pushing this narrative. That's journalistic malfeasance. Now, any honest review of the full transcript and video of that now infamous Trump Tower press conference reveals in total clarity that he excludes bigots from his praise, and in fact, singled them out for his scorn. Trump unambiguously declared, "I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and white nationalists because they should be condemned totally." That's a quote. Even though condemned totally leaves no room for interpretation, The anti-Trump resistance made Charlottesville the centerpiece of their vile narrative that Trump and our whole 2016 America First movement flows from racism. In recent months, the Charlottesville hoax spread like a pandemic after former Vice President Biden launched his 2020 presidential campaign on this scurrilous premise. Now, Cortez has joined with Dennis Prager to create a video for his online instructional site, PragerU, to debunk the myth that our president praised Nazis. Despite serious efforts by big tech firms to suppress the video, it went viral, reaching 4.7 million viewers in just the first week. Because of the success, media figures are now contesting the careful analysis and striving to protect their big lie. Are we surprised? If so, why? In most critiques, like this one from Caleb Akarma of Mediate, the primary refutation lies in dismissing the existence of non-racist, pro-statue protesters cited by President Trump. In the video, it is noted that even the rabidly anti-Trump New York Times identified and interviewed precisely such a person, Michelle Piercy, who stated that good people can go to Charlottesville. She was described as a conservative and pro-monument and explained that Trump had challenged her and her friends who had no interest in standing with Nazis or white supremacists. Akarma and others seek to discredit this one because of her ties to a militia group that also traveled to Charlottesville. Ample video footage does indeed show armed militia members present at the protest. Conservative people, to be sure, and some perhaps quite far right, but these groups did function as de facto neutral security at the event, especially since local police proved so ineffective. Even the Trump antagonizing Washington Post acknowledged varying beliefs among militia members, titling an article just weeks after the riot, "Don't assume the militias at Charlottesville rally were white supremacists." Moreover, Ms. Piercy's affiliation with the militia group hardly cancels out her clearly stated premise for heading to Charlottesville. In addition, other sources corroborate the New York Times account. For instance, former Charlottesville resident and NBC anchor Katie Couric wrote about that fateful weekend for National Geographic. Couric profiled people like Frank Ernest, who traveled to Charlottesville from Virginia Beach and made a passionate argument for keeping the Robert E. Lee statue in place, saying it paid homage to Southerners and his very own Confederate ancestors. But Mr. Ernest disavowed the hateful Unite the Right protesters who had co-opted the symbol of Lee to advance a very different agenda. Sure sounds like fine people on both sides, doesn't it? Now, further, just last week, CNN colleague Jake Tapper acknowledged the clear reality of Trump's 2017 Charlottesville comments, observing, quote, "So he's, Trump's, not saying that the neo-Nazis and white supremacists are very fine people," end quote. It seems eminently reasonable to believe the shared conclusion of such varied media sources, some of which harbor systemic anti-Trump bias. But what if the New York Times, Katie Couric, Jake Tapper, and CNN are all wrong? What if, among the thousands present that weekend in Charlottesville, there were not even one pro-statue, non-racist protester present? The answer is, so what? Trump still expressly and unequivocally condemned white supremacists. The very worst that one can conclude about the president is that he got the crowd composition wrong. Even if that were true, the fine people hoax would still represent a malignant lie, a calumny spread by a cabal of blatantly biased actors hell-bent on slandering this president and the movement. In fact, this damnable lie has become the great deception of the decade by fooling tens of millions of Americans into believing that our commander-in-chief actually praised Nazis. The Democratic media complex betrayed journalistic ethics and poisoned our political dialogue. Why? Because without the ludicrous Russia narrative to attack President Trump anymore, Democratic politicians and their media allies needed another line of attack. Thus, They quickly pivoted to the narrative that Trump is a racist, with the Charlottesville Lie at the center of their slander. But the massive success of the PragerU video proves the actual thirst in our country for accuracy in reporting. The leftist activists, masquerading as journalists, recoil at the revelations of their duplicity. They so bitterly cling to their delusion because they know very well that on the merits they have little hope to defeat Trump in 2020, nor will their disparagement derail the long-term success of our anti-establishment America First movement. Now that's Steve Cortez. Get this, he's a CNN political commentator, and he does serve on the President Trump Hispanic Advisory Council. What? Think about it. Something about it. All right. De Blasio. De Blasio, the mayor of New York. I wouldn't trust this man to go out and get my mail from the mailbox. He is so over the top leftist, he'd screw that up. Anyways, something that's called eliminating talent by force. The American Conservative put this out, and this is really good stuff. He says, in the same book I quoted in an earlier post from Under the Rubble, which you can read online for free, there's an essay on socialism by Igor Shafarevich. In it, he quotes Marx saying that communism aims to eliminate talent by force because equality must be achieved above all things. So reading the Shafarevich, I thought the removal and or relocations of photographs of white males from medical schools on ideological grounds. It won't stop there. That's just the first step. They begin by removing the images of certain figures and will eventually get around to removing people like them from the schools, all in the name of equality. Now, something like this might be about to happen in New York City. Mayor de Blasio's School Diversity Advisory Group has recommended that the city eliminate gifted and talented programs from elementary schools and stop using academic criteria for admission to middle schools. You hear that? Think about that, my friends. I mean, seriously. Serious stuff. So you might be smart, but you're not going to be treated that way in your school. So in the meantime, let's get back to it. I had to take a quick break there, unfortunately. All right. So the question is why? Because diversity, of course. Too many of the kids who get into better schools and programs are white and Asian. Not enough are black and Hispanic, according to the true progressive dogma. Now, all the city's selective schools are already open to anyone, regardless of race. But because the majority of students who gain admission to schools that screen applicants are white and Asian, the panel reasoned merit-based admissions procedures must be racist. Indeed, the advisory panel describes merit-based testing and other screening procedures used in New York City's public schools as exclusionary admissions practices, not because they found any evidence of racial bias in the screening procedures, but simply because the outcome of the screening does not perfectly reflect the demographic makeup of the city. So according to the New York Times, the panel argued that a screening system based on academic ability is not equitable, even if it is effective for some. The Progressive Caucus of the City Council agrees. In a letter to the diversity panel, it urged caps on the allowable concentrations of high-achieving and low-achieving students in the same schools. New York City Schools Chancellor Richard Carranza, who would implement the panel's recommendation if the mayor approves them, already thinks too many students are labeled gifted. In other words, the progressives' answer to the problem of racial gaps in educational achievement is a Harrison Bergeron-like downward social leveling that would ensure that excellence and competition are eliminated in favor of mediocrity and diversity. Since more than half of the city's public schools, students can't pass the state math and English exams, and only 28% of the city's black students pass the math exam compared to 67% of white students and 74% of Asian American students, the leveling effect will likely be significant. So punishing excellence by demanding that everyone conform to the lowest common denominator is a recipe for educational failure and societal stagnation. By this logic, schools will eventually have to eliminate grades and other forms of ranking, since outcomes will never match progressives' diversity requirements. This is identity politics in action. It will punish or eliminate talent by force. It's the old socialist claim that hierarchy is always and everywhere the result of injustice applied to racial politics. For years, New York City has essentially maintained two parallel public school systems. A group of selective schools and programs geared to students labeled gifted and talented is filled mostly with white and Asian children. The rest of the system is open to all students and is predominantly black and Hispanic. Now, a high-level panel appointed by de Blasio is recommending that the city do away with most of these selective programs in an effort to desegregate the system, which has 1.1 million students is by far the largest in the country. That's from the New York Times. Now, there's more. The Times says the panel's report amounts to a repudiation of former Mayor Michael Bloomberg's education agenda, which reoriented the system towards school choice for families, including more gifted and screened schools, to combat decades of low performance. Some of these policies deepened inequality even as student achievement rose. Now, de Blasio has been sharply critical of his predecessor's philosophy on education, but must now decide whether to dismantle some of the structures that Mr. Bloomberg helped to build. You can have excellence or you can have equality, but you can't have both. De Blasio seems to be aiming for equality by denying the concept of good schools. Now, de Blasio has vowed to create a school system where the idea of good schools and bad schools becomes obsolete. Dozens of schools are extremely low performing and many more are struggling. As the city has tried for decades to improve its underperforming schools, it has long relied on accelerated academic offerings and screen schools, including the specialized high schools, to entice white families to stay in public schools. But at the same time, white, Asian, and middle-class families have sometimes exacerbated segregation by avoiding neighborhood schools and instead choosing gifted programs over other selective schools. In gentrifying neighborhoods, some white parents have rallied for more gifted classes, which has in some cases led to segregated classrooms within the diverse schools. You mean that white liberal elites? No, that would never happen. Progressives don't allow one to ask why white, Asian, and middle-class families are avoiding those schools, or that gifted classes lead to segregated classrooms within diverse schools. The progressive mind can only imagine that these outcomes are racist and therefore must be eliminated. So New York City can build a pedagogical heaven on earth. One more note. You know what? I can't even do it. I can't even go on with it. You get the idea. You get the idea of what they're talking about, what they're doing. You get it. I get it. We all get it. By the way, have any of you ever watched the old TV show The Prisoner with Patrick McGowan? I caught it the other night on Pluto TV. If you've got Amazon Fire Stick for your television, you can find it on Pluto TV. I remember watching it as a kid. I remember this was made in 1968, 67, 68, I think. It's one season. It's got like 26 episodes. In the series, McGowan plays a British agent who resigns. He's going home to pack up, get his stuff. He's drugged, knocked out, unconscious, wakes up, in something called the Village. And this is where it gets interesting, because back then they didn't really, they screamed communism, but you didn't see it or hear so much on television. In The Prisoner, which is a BBC production, by the way, the whole village is an idyllic village. And it screams, when you watch it, it screams socialism. And how Patrick McGowan's character is fighting the system, trying to get out of this prison. It's a bizarre prison, to be sure. But, for example, everybody in the village does not have a name, they have a number. A number, yes. No names, just a number. And, of course, they have a labor exchange. They have the Citizens Council to resolve disputes. All under the benevolent leadership of a mysterious number one and the ever-changing administrator number two. And everybody there, whether they work in the village or live in the village, because they do both, all have numbers, various numbers. But anyways, I'm watching this, and I'm thinking this is precisely a socialist wet dream come true. I'm telling you. So I'm watching it, and I'm saying, oh my gosh, yeah, this is what he's really talking about. And not only did Patrick McGowan do the lead in it, he produced it and wrote many of the episodes. So I encourage you, if you want to see a socialist wet dream, watch The Prisoner. You'll get, I mean, they say a lot of stuff, and they do a lot of things in the series, but it's all very much below the surface. Definitely a communist, socialist regime in the prison. It's very. I just thought I'd mention it. Oh, by the way, got an email. Somebody said, "Hey, what's this about the negative yields?" You just all right. I just talked about it last week and the week before. About the like Germany inverted yields on the economy and how there's supposed to be a recession. Can't have a recession without 2 straight quarters of negative GDP, and this quarter will be no different. Positive GDP, more GDP, positive. But yet you still got those on the left screaming recession is coming. Well, guess what, bozos? In a capitalistic economy, even if we do have some aspects of socialism in it, you will have good periods and bad periods in the economy. It's cyclical. It goes up and down all the time, always has. A recession is not something that happened in the 70s or in our lifetime. Recessions have been happening in our country's history all the time. You got good economic times, you got bad economic times. It's just the way it is. What's different is how government reacts to it. Many times government overreaches itself and screws everybody else in the process. So, again, when you hear people screaming, oh, we got a recession coming, really? Ask them to define a sign, a signal from the economy that says a recession is imminent. If they cannot tell you that 2 straight quarters of negative GDP is the sign of a recession, they're foolish. They're uneducated. They're just repeating what they heard. Well, it's true. It is. I got 10 minutes. I could do more. You know, one of the things that we've been hearing about also is China. China's not bad. The hell they're not! They are more threatening, cunning, and dangerous than you think. Front Page Mag, they say this: inside every progressive is a totalitarian screaming to get out. And that's true, by the way. So President Trump confirmed he is considering an attempt to buy Greenland for strategic reasons. No, it's not now. Season April Fool's joke. Trump, it seems, hasn't forgotten his old job. Remember, before he became president of the free world, the septuagenarian was the world's most famous real estate developer. If the acquisition of the self-governed Danish territory comes to fruition, this would be a savvy piece of expansionism. Why? People can ridicule the president all they want, but Greenland is rich in natural resources, including iron ore, lead, zinc, diamonds, gold, rare earth elements, uranium, and oil. And that's according to the Brookings Institution, a non-profit public policy organization in D.C. Anyway, why not? After all, the U.S. acquired Louisiana from France, Florida from Spain, Alaska from Russia, and much of its southwest from Mexico. Furthermore, in the 1860s, the U.S. nearly bought Greenland and Iceland. The idea, we're told, was to surround Canada with U.S. territory and thus persuade it to join the United States. Now, in 1946, the U.S. tried to buy Greenland again, but the offer was rejected. Maybe, just maybe, the third time might be the lucky, Whatever the outcome, when it comes to savvy expansionism, there's only one country that appears to be far ahead of the United States, and that country is China. Now, emerging in 1999, Beijing's going global strategy sought to bid farewell to the Mao-era mindset of self-reliance, urging Chinese firms to take advantage of booming world trade and to invest in global markets. The idea that one government could commandeer subregions of Asia, Europe, and Africa, which account for 64% of the world's population and 30% of the world GDP, might sound ludicrous, but try telling this to the Chi-Com government. Make no mistake, under Xi Jinping's guidance, China is engaged in an ideological and economic venture. The country's ambitions for global leadership couldn't be clearer. Between 2005 and 2017, the combined value of China's global investment in construction was $1.8 trillion. Construction of what exactly? 4 words: One Belt, One Road, otherwise known as the Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese government is making a concerted effort to increase infrastructural, economic, and political connectivity between China and other countries of Asia, Africa, and Europe. This is very much the new Silk Road, a multinational endeavor to exert a level of smart power throughout the Eurasian landmass. While other countries find themselves consumed by petty squabbles, Beijing officials discuss square footage, potential monetary gain, and militaristic strategies. As Sohail Khan notes, he says, this initiative helps develop infrastructure in developed countries and also helps China to invest and own infrastructure in other countries. Interestingly, if you look at the top sectors in which China has invested till date, have been energy, transport, real estate, and metals, the key ingredients for developing infrastructure. Unsurprisingly, such a move has proved controversial in many Western capitals, particularly Washington. Many view it as the means for the Chinese to spread influence abroad and saddle countries with unimaginable levels of debt. So over the past decade, China's lending to other countries has surged, causing debt levels to jump dangerously high, worrying as half as such debt to developing economies is hidden. So why does this matter? According to a CNBC report, such hidden debt means that the borrowing isn't reported to or recorded by official institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, or the Paris Club, a group of creditor nations. According to a recent study carried out by the Kyle Institute, since the early 2000s, other countries' debt owed to China has soared tenfold, from less than $500 billion to more than $5 trillion, or from 1% of the global economic output to more than 5%. The report ends on an ominous note. This has transformed China into the largest official creditor, easily surpassing the IMF or the World Bank. And we all know how banks hate competition. So do governments. Estimates suggest that China, one of the most repressive countries in the world, now accounts for a quarter of the total bank lending to emerging markets. So why is China so eager to loan money? Benevolence? No. Perhaps you are familiar with the concept of indentured servitude, wherein an employee finds himself within a system of unfree labor. He or she is bound by a signed or forced contract for a fixed time. Escape is impossible. You are owned in every sense of the word. Is China operating its own form of indentured servitude? One assumes so because the fascist leaders in Beijing are not known for acts of pure kindness. If in doubt, just look at the chaos in Hong Kong. Nefarious intentions and not benevolence explain China's willingness to help other countries. After all, the U.S. Defense Department expects China to add military bases around the world to protect its investments in its One Belt, One Road initiative. Beijing currently has just one overseas military base in Djibouti. However, officials are planning others, including one in Pakistan. China is clearly seeking to project itself as a global superpower. The One Belt, One Road initiative could prove to be very dangerous. That's John Glenn. He's a professor of psychology at the American University of Bahrain. And he put that on front page. Think about that, my friends. You got it? All right. What else have we got going? Okay. What we'll do is, I'll have to call this up. I don't do it don't get to it too often. But of course, we have to go to Breitbart News and check out, see what our social justice warriors are doing. Because these guys are the absolute lunatics. Where are we going here? Where is it? No. Ah, here we go. You want to do it? We've got a couple more minutes, so let me think. You know what? Oh, before we even do that, I may even get to it. Real quickly, we were talking about the inverted yield. What that means is this. Germany is the leader in the inverted yield. That's a negative yield. So what they're doing here, let's put it in straight terms. I go to you, I say, I need you to lend me $100. But I'm going to charge you a negative yield. I'm not going to pay you interest on it. So if I'm Germany and I want people to invest in my country, I say, you're going to lend me money. And I'm going to pay you back a negative yield. Now, it changed today. I don't remember what the number was today. But, this is what happens with negative yield. So, you leave me $100. I, in turn, go to pay you back. But, because it's negative yield, you don't get your $100 plus interest back. You might get, say, $85. I'm going to keep the $15. $15 is mine. I'm going to give you your $85 back. In a nutshell, and it's very simplistic, that's what they're talking about. That's why everybody's rushing to the United States to buy U.S. Treasuries, because we are paying like 1.5% on a 10-year yield. So there. That's really what it means. That's what they're talking about. Don't get crazy. Don't get confused. As a matter of fact, the market today, the last couple of days, Germany dropped it again. They're dropped a negative yield again on their treasury notes. Guess what? Our market doesn't care. It just shrugged it off. It's a rally today. It was a rally yesterday. We are right back where we were 2 weeks ago when it was first reported about negative yield and the market went crazy and dropped 800 points. We're right back where we were two weeks ago. Don't let the mainstream media fool you. Now look, if you like what you want to hear here, do me a favor. ContraRadioNetwork.podbean.com. Go there, donate. I'm asking for $2 a month. $2 a month. Come on. $2. I want my $2. Come on, help me out here with the operations. I appreciate it. To my good friend Charles in Nebraska, thanks for your generous donation again. I appreciate it. Until then, I'm John Jeffers here on the Jeffers Brief. Thanks and have a good week. Bye.